His clothes were torn, his face covered in dirt, and his eyes, when Samuel glimpsed them, were sharp and wary. Samuel froze. He didn't recognize the man, and he didn't know if he was dangerous. The man's movements were tense, almost desperate, and there was something in the way he moved that suggested he had been running for a long time. Samuel took a deep breath and stepped outside. The air was cool, carrying the scent of dry earth and desert sage. The man didn't notice him at first, which gave Samuel the moment he needed to call out. "Hey!" he shouted. The voice sounded louder than he intended in the quiet night. The man froze instantly, then turned. His eyes locked onto Samuel, wide with fear, suspicion, and exhaustion. Samuel raised his hands, trying to show he meant no harm.
"I'm not going to hurt you," he said calmly. "You're on my property."
"Are you hurt?" The man didn't respond at first. He didn't lower his guard either. Samuel noticed the rifle slung loosely across his arm and realized the man was ready for anything. But then, slowly, the tension in the man's shoulders relaxed just slightly. I need shelter," the man said finally, his voice low, rough, and tired. "Just for the night. I can leave before sunrise." There was a hint of desperation in his tone, a weariness that Samuel could feel. Samuel considered the situation. He didn't know who this man was, or why he was running, but he could see that he wasn't a threat, not really. He looked more like someone who had been through hell and was simply trying to survive. Samuel nodded. "All right," he said. "You can come in. But you stay where I can see you." The man hesitated, then nodded. His movements were careful, as if every step might be dangerous. Samuel led him inside the ranch house. The interior smelled of wood, fire smoke, and the faint scent of old leather from the saddle hung in the corner. Samuel gestured to the bed. "You can use the bed. I'll take the floor." The man blinked, as if surprised by the offer. Then, slowly, a ghost of a smile crossed his face. "You gave me your bed, rancher," he said, his voice low but carrying a strange warning. "Get ready for what comes next." Samuel chuckled nervously. He didn't know if it was a joke or a warning or something else entirely. Either way, he shrugged. "Well, I guess we'll see what comes next, won't we?" The fugitive, because Samuel had decided to call him that in his head, though he didn't know the man's name, moved to the bed. He was careful, methodical, as if even lying down could be dangerous. Samuel noticed his hands were calloused, his fingers scarred from something that was clearly painful to him. The man's eyes darted around the room constantly, scanning, calculating, never resting. Samuel felt a mixture of fear and admiration. Here was someone who had lived a life filled with danger and survival, someone who had been running from something, or someone for a long time. They ate a simple meal together, bread, dried meat, and coffee. The man didn't speak much. He moved quietly, deliberately. But Samuel could feel his eyes studying everything, the walls, the windows, the exits, the doors. He was alert, always alert. Samuel realized that this was not just a man in need of shelter. This was a man who knew how to survive, who knew the dangers that lurked in the desert, and who had learned to trust very few. After the meal, they sat by the fire. Samuel tried to make small talk, to break the tension that had built between them. He asked about the town, the weather, the ranch itself. The man answered in short sentences, never revealing too much, but there was a strange intelligence in his answers. He was calculating, thoughtful, and careful, like someone who had spent years watching, learning, and adapting. Eventually the man leaned back, exhausted. His breathing slowed, and Samuel noticed the faint tremor in his hands. "You really are kind to offer me your bed," he said again, almost as if testing the words in his mouth. "Most people wouldn't do this. Most people would call the law, or worse." Samuel nodded. "I do what I think is right," he said simply. "You've been running a long time, haven't you?" The man's eyes flicked toward the floor. "Yes," he admitted. "Too long." There was a pause. The silence was thick, heavy with the weight of unspoken stories, of lives lived in danger, of nights spent hiding, waiting, and hoping. Samuel realized that this man had been through more than most people could imagine. And yet, here he was, trusting a stranger enough to take his bed for the night. Hours passed. The fire burned low. The night outside was deep and quiet. Occasionally, a coyote howled in the distance, a reminder that the desert was still alive, still dangerous, still unpredictable. Samuel listened to the man's steady breathing on the bed and felt a strange sense of connection. They were two very different lives intersecting in this remote place. One was a simple rancher, accustomed to routine and calm. The other was a fugitive, accustomed to danger and uncertainty. And yet, for this one night, their lives had come together. Samuel couldn't sleep well on the floor. His mind kept returning to the man's words, "Get ready for what comes next." He didn't know if it was a threat, a prediction, or simply a statement of fact. He could hear the man shifting slightly on the bed, restless even in sleep. The tension in the room never fully dissipated. Samuel knew that the world outside was still dangerous, that the fugitive's pursuers could come at any time. And yet, there was also a strange sense of trust forming. Fragile, but real. By the time the first light of dawn touched the desert, painting it with shades of gold and pink, Samuel and the man were both awake. The fugitive sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the horizon. Samuel offered him some food, and the man accepted quietly. "Thank you," he said simply, looking Samuel in the eye. There was no fear in his voice now, only respect. "You saved me a little tonight." Samuel nodded. "We all need help sometimes." As the man prepared to leave, Samuel felt a pang of curiosity and concern. Who was this man really? What had brought him to this point? And what exactly did he mean by "get ready for what comes next"? He knew their encounter was far from over, that the desert and the world beyond still held many challenges for both of them. And yet for this night, they had shared a small piece of humanity, a quiet connection between two very different people, brought together by chance, circumstance, and perhaps a little kindness. The man paused at the door, glancing back at Samuel. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, and filled with a story that he would not yet tell. "I won't forget this," he said. Then, without another word, he stepped out into the desert, disappearing into the morning light. Samuel watched him go, the weight of the night's events settling on his shoulders. Despair. He returned to the house, feeling a mixture of relief, curiosity, and anticipation. The words echoed in his mind one last time, "Get ready for what comes next." And deep down, Samuel knew that the next chapter of this encounter, this strange, tense, and unlikely friendship, was only just beginning. The morning sun poured over the ranch, casting long shadows across the fields and the dry desert beyond. Samuel Carter moved quietly about the property, his thoughts still lingering on the night's visitor. The man, the fugitive, was gone, yet his presence still lingered in the house and in Samuel's mind. There was something about the man that unsettled him, but not in a threatening way. It was the feeling that the world had shifted, that life had become a little less predictable and a little more dangerous, and that he had, for a moment, shared space with someone extraordinary. Samuel had a routine to maintain. The horses needed feeding, the cows milked, and the fences checked. But his mind kept wandering back to this stranger. Who was he really? What had brought him to the edge of the desert, and why had he chosen Samuel's ranch as his refuge? Samuel could not shake the thought that their paths were somehow connected now, whether he liked it or not. Later that morning, a sound from the barn drew his attention. It was faint at first, a creak of wood, the soft scraping of boots on the floor. Samuel froze. His hand went instinctively to the side of his coat, where a small revolver hung. But then he realized that it could be nothing more than the wind, or a stray animal. Yet he could not ignore the sound entirely. Something about the way the man had moved the night before suggested careful observation, a life spent being cautious and wary. It made Samuel wonder if he had underestimated the danger that might still be near. He walked toward the barn, every step deliberate. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of earth and dry grass. As he approached, he saw nothing unusual, just the tools and equipment neatly arranged as he had left them. Still, he could feel the tension in the air, as though the ranch itself was holding its breath. Samuel shook his head. Perhaps it was just his imagination. Perhaps the events of last night had stirred something inside him, a sense of vigilance he had never felt before. That afternoon, the fugitive returned. Samuel was working near the water trough when he saw a shadow moving across the distant desert. At first he thought he was imagining it, but then the figure became clearer, moving quickly but carefully toward the ranch. Samuel's heart raced. The man approached cautiously, his hands relaxed but ready, and when he finally reached the porch, he paused, surveying the ranch as if nothing had changed since last night. "You came back," Samuel said, his voice a mix of surprise and curiosity. "I didn't expect to see you so soon." The fugitive nodded, eyes scanning the land, the fences, and the hills beyond. "I didn't come back for you," he said quietly. "I came back because I need to make sure the path is clear." His tone was calm, but there was a tension in his shoulders, a readiness that Samuel recognized from last night. The man was always prepared, always alert. "You need to know," he continued, "there are people looking for me, and they don't care who gets hurt in the process." Samuel felt a chill run down his spine. He had known there was danger, but hearing it confirmed made it real. "Danger?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "How close are they?" The fugitive shrugged, a small, weary gesture. "Close enough that I need to be careful, and close enough that you should be careful too." He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly as he scanned the horizon. "I don't mean to scare you, rancher, but it's not safe for either of us to be careless." For a moment, Samuel didn't know what to say. He had been cautious all his life, but this was different. This was a man who had lived on the edge, who had run from danger for reasons Samuel could only imagine. And now, that danger had crept into his own quiet life. He realized almost reluctantly that his days of simple routine were over, at least for a while. Over the next few days, the fugitive stayed close to the ranch. He moved quietly, never settling for long in one place, always alert. Samuel observed him carefully. He noticed how the man's eyes flicked to the horizon at the slightest sound, how his hands were constantly near his weapons, and how he never spoke unnecessarily. It was clear that the fugitive had been living this way for a long time, learning to survive in a world where trust was rare and danger was constant. During the day, the fugitive began to share bits of his story. He spoke cautiously, never giving too much away, but enough for Samuel to understand that he had not chosen this life willingly. He had been forced into it by circumstances beyond his control, by betrayals and threats, by a world that had turned against him. Samuel listened, fascinated and sympathetic. He realized that the man was not a criminal in the sense most people would think. He was a survivor, a man fighting to stay alive in a world that seemed determined to hunt him down. The more Samuel learned, the more he understood the fugitive's skills. The man had an extraordinary ability to read the land, to anticipate danger, and to move without being seen. He taught Samuel how to notice subtle signs, the disturbed sand that indicated a hidden path, the tracks that suggested someone had passed through recently, the sounds of the desert that most would ignore. Samuel absorbed these lessons with a mix of awe and practicality. He realized that his quiet life had never required these skills, but now they might save him too. Despite the growing tension, there were moments of unexpected calm. The fugitive would sit by the fire with Samuel, sharing quiet meals or stories of the land. Sometimes he would play an old harmonica he carried, filling the air with simple melodies that seemed out of place in such a tense world. Samuel began to see him not just as a fugitive, but as a person with depth, intelligence, and a sense of honor. There was a quiet dignity in the man, even as he moved through life with constant caution. Yet, the threat of danger was never far. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant hills, Samuel spotted riders approaching in the far distance. He knew immediately that these were not ordinary travelers. The fugitive's reaction was instantaneous. He moved to a vantage point, scanning the horizon, calculating distances, and analyzing the terrain. Samuel watched him, amazed at the sharpness of his mind and the steadiness of his hands. "They're scouts," the fugitive whispered. "They're checking the area. We might have more coming soon. You need to be ready, rancher." His voice was calm, but there was a quiet intensity that made Samuel's stomach tighten. This was no longer a simple act of kindness or chance encounter. Their lives had become intertwined, and the world outside was closing in. Samuel spent the rest of the evening helping the fugitive prepare. They reinforced the barn doors, checked the animals, and made plans for what to do if the riders approached.
Samuel felt a strange mixture of fear and excitement.
He had always known life on the ranch could be unpredictable, but this was a level of unpredictability he had never imagined. And yet, he could not deny the thrill of it, the sense of being part of something larger, of facing real danger, and of learning from someone who had survived far more than he could ever imagine. As night fell, they sat together by the fire once more. The fugitive's eyes were sharp, constantly scanning, but there was also a moment of quiet reflection. "You've got courage, rancher," he said softly. "Not many people would have offered their bed to a stranger. Not many people would have stayed calm when danger approached. You've got something most don't. Don't waste it." Samuel felt a surge of pride, tempered by humility. He had acted out of kindness, but the fugitive's words made him realize that courage and kindness were sometimes inseparable. They had become partners, in a sense, united by circumstance, and perhaps by a shared understanding of what it meant to survive in a world that could be harsh and unforgiving. The night stretched on, the fire crackling and shadows dancing across the walls. Samuel lay on the floor, listening to the fugitive's steady breathing and the sounds of the desert outside. He knew that their days together were only beginning, that there were challenges ahead, and that danger was never far. But he also knew that he had learned something invaluable. That trust, even when fragile and fleeting, could change the course of events, and that kindness, when combined with courage, could create bonds that nothing could easily break. By the time dawn approached, Samuel felt a mixture of anticipation and dread. He had come to respect the fugitive not just for his skills, but for his resilience, his wisdom, and his honor. And he understood that the world outside would soon test both of them in ways they could not yet imagine. But for now, in the quiet hours before sunrise, there was a fragile peace, a momentary pause in the endless dance between danger. And in that moment, Samuel realized that the man's warning from the first night, "Get ready for what comes next," was not a threat. It was a promise, a lesson, and a challenge. The days ahead would be difficult, filled with tension and uncertainty. But he also knew that together he and the fugitive could face whatever came their way, armed not just with weapons or skill, but with respect, courage, and a quiet understanding of what it truly meant to survive. The days following the fugitive's return were tense, filled with quiet preparation and cautious observation. Samuel Carter had learned to watch the horizon as carefully as he had watched his cattle, to listen to the desert as if it were speaking to him. Every sound, the rustle of dry grass, the snap of a branch, the distant cry of a hawk, felt amplified. And yet, life on the ranch still went on, with its chores, its routines, and its quiet rhythm. Samuel found himself balancing normality and vigilance in a way he had never imagined. One afternoon, as he repaired a fence along the eastern boundary of the property, the fugitive appeared at the barn, motioning him to come closer. His face was calm, but his eyes held the intensity of someone who had been running for far too long. "They are moving closer," he said quietly, almost as if speaking aloud might draw the pursuers faster. "We don't have much time. We need to prepare." Samuel's stomach tightened. He had expected some danger, but hearing it confirmed made it all the more real. "Prepare how?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The fugitive's gaze swept the land. "We use what we have. The ranch is more than it seems. Every fence, every gate, every barn is part of a defense if we use it right. I'll show you." They began by securing the ranch, barricading gates, moving animals to safer enclosures, and setting up lookouts. Samuel noticed how methodical the fugitive was, how every step seemed calculated, every move deliberate. It wasn't just instinct, it was strategy, experience born from years of survival. The fugitive taught Samuel to notice small details: the disturbed sand that could indicate a hidden path, the shadows cast by approaching riders, even the subtle changes in the wind that could carry voices. As evening approached, the fugitive moved Samuel to a higher vantage point on the hill behind the ranch house. From there, the surrounding desert stretched endlessly, pale gold and brown under the setting sun. "Look," he said, pointing to a faint trail in the distance. Samuel squinted and saw it, a thin, almost invisible line in the dirt. A group of riders moved slowly along it, their figures small but distinct. "Scouts," the fugitive said. "They are checking the area. More will follow if they find anything unusual." Samuel felt a chill. He had never seen danger like this so close, so deliberate. He wanted to panic, but the fugitive's calm presence steadied him. "We need a plan," the fugitive continued. "If they come here, we can't run. We must use the land to our advantage."
They spent the rest of the evening setting up simple defenses, using the ranch's natural features.
They arranged rocks and logs to create obstacles, positioned the horses and cattle in ways that could block or slow intruders, and prepared makeshift hiding spots throughout the property. Samuel noticed that the fugitive's eyes never rested, constantly scanning, calculating, predicting. It was exhausting to watch, and yet fascinating. He realized that this man's life had been one long lesson in survival, and that he too was learning to see the land differently, more attentively, more carefully. Night fell, and the desert seemed alive with shadows. The fire in the house provided a small circle of light and warmth, but outside the world was uncertain, filled with hidden dangers. Samuel lay awake on the floor, listening to the wind, the distant cries of night birds, and the faint movement of animals. The fugitive sat near the window, rifle across his lap, eyes scanning the darkness. Samuel felt both fear and awe. Here was a man who had faced danger countless times, and yet for the first time he had trusted Samuel enough to share it. A sudden noise from the eastern fence made both men tense. Samuel froze, heart pounding, as the fugitive gestured silently. They watched together, waiting for movement. A shadow detached itself from the darkness, a horseman cautiously approaching, moving slowly, deliberately. Samuel recognized the pursuer immediately, the determination in the rider's stance unmistakable. The fugitive whispered, "Stay calm. Let me handle the first contact." He moved with a quiet precision, positioning himself so that he could see without being fully exposed. Samuel watched in tense silence as the rider drew closer, unaware of the preparation and caution surrounding him. The rider stopped near the fence, scanning the ranch. His horse shifted uneasily, the animal sensing the tension in the air. The fugitive remained still, barely breathing, watching for the right moment. Samuel felt his hands grow clammy, his pulse quickening. Every instinct screamed to act, but he had learned to wait, to trust the fugitive's judgment. After a long moment, the rider decided nothing was amiss and moved on, disappearing into the darkness. Samuel exhaled slowly, relief mixing with tension. "That was too close," he whispered. The fugitive nodded. "Scouts are smart. They move carefully. There will be more. We can't relax." His eyes, sharp and calculating, returned to the shadows beyond the ranch. Samuel realized that he had underestimated the reality of being involved in someone else's danger. It was no longer distant, it was immediate. Over the next few days, they repeated this cycle of vigilance. The fugitive taught Samuel not only to watch but to move carefully, to anticipate danger, and to act decisively when necessary. They created signals, subtle movements that would indicate intruders, and practiced quiet strategies to protect themselves and the ranch. Samuel's confidence grew, but so did his understanding of how fragile their safety truly was. One afternoon, a rider approached again, this time moving faster, more deliberately. The fugitive spotted him from the hill and motioned Samuel to hide. They crouched low behind the rocks, watching as the rider slowed near the fence, studying the property with suspicion. Samuel felt a thrill of fear and adrenaline, realizing how much he had learned to see and react. The fugitive whispered instructions, guiding him through every movement. Samuel followed, holding his breath, heart pounding in rhythm with the desert wind. The rider moved on again, but this time Samuel noticed something different. A second horse, hidden just beyond a ridge, moving quietly, as if waiting for an opportunity. The fugitive's expression hardened. "They are coordinating," he said. "This is not random. They are coming back, and they are not alone." That evening they worked quickly to reinforce the ranch's defenses. Samuel moved with a newfound sense of purpose, following the fugitive's instructions with precision. They reinforced doors and windows, dug shallow trenches to obscure the land's features, and created simple obstacles that could slow down the riders. The fugitive explained the importance of patience, observation, and timing, emphasizing that the land itself could be their ally. As night fell again, the desert seemed to hum with anticipation. The fugitive sat by the window, scanning the horizon with his rifle across his lap. Samuel lay on the floor, trying to rest but unable to escape the tension that filled the air. He had learned so much, but he also knew that the coming days could bring real confrontation. The pursuers were clever, persistent, and relentless, and yet he felt a strange sense of readiness, a growing confidence that they could face whatever was coming. Suddenly a shout broke the quiet night. Samuel bolted upright, heart racing. The fugitive moved instantly, signaling him to stay low. Shadows shifted, and he saw the first of the pursuers approaching with speed, torches in hand, shouting commands to one another. The moment of confrontation had arrived. Samuel felt a surge of fear and determination, realizing that their training, vigilance, and careful preparation were about to be tested. The fugitive whispered, "Stay calm. Move when I say. We control this." Samuel nodded, gripping his own makeshift weapon, listening to every instruction. The first rider reached the fence, but the fugitive's trap slowed him, forcing him to dismount and move cautiously. Samuel watched, amazed at how calculated and effective the fugitive's planning had been. Shots rang out, carefully aimed, not to harm unnecessarily, but to warn and control. The riders hesitated, confused by the obstacles and the unexpected resistance. Samuel felt his pulse racing, but he remembered the lessons he had learned: observation, patience, and strategic action. Together, he and the fugitive worked in silent coordination, using the land, the fences, and their positioning to create the impression of greater strength and preparation than they truly had. After what felt like hours, the riders finally retreated, disappearing into the night. Samuel exhaled, leaning heavily against the wall, exhausted but exhilarated. The fugitive joined him, his expression calm but intense. "This was only the beginning," he said softly. "They will come again. And next time, they might not be so cautious." Samuel realized the truth of the words he had heard on that first night. Get ready for what comes next. This was not a casual warning. It was a lesson he was still learning, about vigilance, courage, and the harsh realities of a world where danger could appear without warning. And yet, despite the fear and exhaustion, he felt a strange satisfaction, a sense that he had faced something extraordinary and survived, not alone, but together with the man who had changed his quiet life forever. The sun rose slowly over the desert, painting the ranch in shades of gold and orange. Samuel Carter moved carefully around the property, his eyes scanning the horizon as always. But today a heaviness settled in his chest. The night before had been exhausting, and the skirmish with the pursuers had left both him and the fugitive drained. The man, whose name Samuel still did not know, had remained silent for much of the morning, tending to small injuries from the confrontation, and moving with a quiet, deliberate pace. Samuel realized that although they had survived the immediate danger, the tension in the air was far from gone. By mid-morning, Samuel noticed the fugitive sitting quietly by the edge of the barn, one hand pressed lightly against his side. His face was pale, and his breathing came in shallow, careful waves. Samuel approached cautiously, unsure if speaking might startle him. "Are you all right?" he asked. The fugitive looked up, his sharp eyes meeting Samuel's with a mixture of gratitude and frustration. "I'll manage," he said softly, though the tremor in his hand betrayed the truth. "I was careless. A shallow cut, nothing serious, but it needs attention." He had always been handy with basic first aid, but he had never treated serious injuries before. Yet, he had learned enough from his years on the ranch to know how to clean a wound, stop bleeding, and prevent infection. Carefully, he guided the fugitive inside, fetched clean water, bandages, and antiseptic, and worked quietly, focusing on the task at hand. The fugitive remained still, tense but patient, letting Samuel tend to him without interference. There was a trust forming here, fragile, unspoken, and powerful. As he cleaned and dressed the wound, Samuel asked gently, "What happened back there? Did they?" The fugitive shook his head.
They didn't find the main path.
"They only stumbled into a minor trap. I was careless, that's all."
"I underestimated the terrain." He paused, his eyes distant.
"This is why I travel light, why I move quickly. Every mistake can cost you more than you imagine."
Samuel nodded, understanding the weight behind his words.
He had begun to realize that the fugitive's life was a constant balance between survival and peril, that even small errors could have serious consequences. After tending to the injury, Samuel prepared a simple meal for them both. The fugitive accepted quietly, eating slowly, his eyes scanning the property from time to time. Samuel sat opposite him, studying the man in a new light. He was not just a skilled survivor. He was a person shaped by hardship, a life of constant caution and relentless endurance. Samuel felt a deep respect for him growing inside. He realized that despite the danger, the man had shown him lessons in courage, awareness, and patience that he would never forget. The day stretched on, and the fugitive remained mostly quiet, resting and observing the ranch. As the afternoon wore into evening, he finally spoke, his voice low and reflective. "I can't stay here forever," he said. "Even if they don't find me tonight, the next group will be faster, smarter. I have to keep moving." "But," his voice trailed off, and he looked at Samuel with something akin to hesitation. "But you've taught me that trust is possible. Even if brief, even if dangerous, it exists. That matters more than you might realize." Samuel felt a lump in his throat. He had always believed in helping others, but he had never expected such acknowledgement from someone who had lived a life as harsh and unforgiving as the fugitive's. "You've taught me too," Samuel said quietly, "about patience, about seeing danger before it finds you, about courage." He hesitated, then added, "And about trust. I never thought I'd feel it so quickly with someone I barely know." The fugitive nodded slightly, a small acknowledgement that words were enough for now. As the sun dipped behind the distant hills, they began preparing for the possibility of more riders arriving under cover of darkness. The fugitive moved with quiet precision, reinforcing the fences, creating new lookout points, and repositioning the horses to strategic locations. Samuel followed his instructions carefully, aware that even a minor misstep could compromise their safety. Together, they transformed the ranch into a defensible space, using every feature of the land to their advantage. Rocks, hills, barns, and fences became tools of survival. Samuel marveled at the fugitive's ingenuity, realizing that these were skills honed over years of necessity, skills he had never imagined needing himself. Night fell and the desert was alive with tension. The wind carried distant sounds, the faint creak of hooves, the whisper of branches brushing against each other, the soft rustle of animals moving quietly. Samuel lay awake on the floor listening, learning, remembering the fugitive's lessons about patience and observation. The man sat near the window, rifle across his lap, eyes scanning the darkness. Every so often he would whisper instructions to Samuel, guiding him through subtle movements, tiny precautions, and careful observation. Samuel had never felt more alert, more connected to the land and the dangers it held. Around midnight, the first sign of the pursuers appeared. A faint light flickered on the horizon, and the sound of hooves approached. Samuel's heart raced, but he forced himself to remain calm, recalling everything he had learned from the fugitive. They moved silently, taking up positions that allowed them to observe without being easily seen. The fugitive's eyes narrowed, calculating distance, timing, and strategy. "They are scouts," he whispered. "We need to control the first encounter." Let them feel hesitation. The riders arrived at the fence, moving cautiously, Samuel watched, holding his breath, as the fugitive implemented small but effective traps and obstacles, slowing the riders and forcing them to dismount. Samuel realized that the man's strategy relied not on brute force but on clever use of terrain, timing, and psychological advantage. The riders hesitated, confused by the obstacles and the unexpected resistance. Samuel felt a mix of fear and exhilaration, recognizing the precision and skill of the fugitive's planning. After a tense standoff, the riders retreated, disappearing into the night. Samuel exhaled, leaning heavily against a fence post. The fugitive joined him, his expression calm but intense. "They will return," he said softly. "And next time, they may not hesitate." Samuel nodded, understanding that their safety was temporary, that vigilance would be required until the fugitive could move on safely. In the following days, the fugitive's injury began to heal slowly, but the tension remained. Samuel and the man shared more stories, their conversation growing deeper and more personal. The fugitive spoke of the injustices he had faced, the betrayals that had forced him onto the run, and the lessons he had learned about survival, trust, and resilience. Samuel shared his own life, his routines, and his quiet moments of reflection on the ranch. The more they spoke, the more Samuel realized that they were learning from each other, forming a bond built on respect, shared danger, and mutual understanding. One afternoon, the fugitive finally explained his plan. "I can't stay here indefinitely," he said, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "They will keep coming. The safest path for me is to leave before sunrise tomorrow. But I need to make sure you are prepared too. If they follow me, you must protect yourself and the ranch. Use everything you have learned." Samuel nodded solemnly, realizing that this was a test of everything he had absorbed in the past days. The fugitive's teachings were not just about survival. They were about courage, awareness, and making difficult choices under pressure. That night, as they sat by the fire one last time, the fugitive's words carried weight beyond the immediate danger. "You have learned quickly," he said.
And that will serve you well. Remember, survival is not just about fighting.
"It is about patience, observation, and knowing when to act. You have courage, Samuel. Don't lose it." Samuel felt a mixture of pride and humility. He had never faced such a situation before, and yet he had grown in ways he could not have imagined, guided by the wisdom and experience of a man whose life had been forged in danger and hardship. When the first light of dawn touched the desert, Samuel watched as the fugitive prepared to leave. The man moved quietly, checking every detail, ensuring that their paths were safe and that no pursuers were immediately nearby. Samuel felt a pang of emotion, gratitude, respect, and a sense of loss. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything." The fugitive nodded, a small but sincere acknowledgement.
"I won't forget this, Samuel," he said, "and I hope you remember what I taught you."
Trust, vigilance, courage, these will carry you further than you know. And with that, he disappeared into the golden light of the desert, leaving Samuel standing alone on the ranch, the weight of the experience settling over him like the morning sun. Samuel knew that life would never be the same. He had faced danger, learned from someone who had survived more than he could imagine, and discovered a depth of courage and awareness within himself that he had never known. And as he returned to the routines of the ranch, he carried with him not only the lessons of survival, but the memory of a bond formed under extraordinary circumstances, a bond that had changed him forever. The first light of dawn stretched over Samuel Carter's ranch, painting the desert in pale shades of pink and gold. The air was cool and still, carrying the scent of dry grass and earth. Samuel moved slowly outside, his mind alert yet heavy with anticipation. Today would be different. The fugitive, the man who had changed the rhythm of his life, was preparing to leave. Samuel had known this day would come, yet he felt a strange mixture of pride, anxiety, and sadness. The man emerged from the barn, his movements deliberate and careful. He looked healthy, though tired, his wound mostly healed thanks to Samuel's care. He checked the horizon with the same sharp, calculating eyes Samuel had grown used to seeing. Samuel noticed the small gestures, the way the man adjusted his gear, how he paused to study the terrain, how he measured every step. These were habits forged from a life lived on the edge, lessons that Samuel had absorbed in the past days, lessons that now felt like part of him too. "You ready?" the fugitive asked quietly, his voice calm but edged with caution. Samuel nodded, finding his voice in the morning light. "I think so. I've learned more than I expected." The fugitive gave a slight smile. "Good. That'll serve you well. Remember, vigilance isn't just about watching for danger. It's about patience, awareness, and knowing when to act. And courage. Never forget that courage is sometimes quiet. It doesn't always roar." Samuel felt a lump in his throat. He had come to respect this man more than anyone he had ever met. Over the past days, they had faced danger together, learned from each other, and built a bond that went beyond words. It was not friendship in the usual sense, but something deeper, a connection forged through trust, shared experiences, and the understanding that life was fragile and precious. The fugitive glanced back at the ranch one last time. "I won't forget this place," he said softly, "and I won't forget what you've done for me. Few people would have shown the kindness you did. Fewer still would have stood firm when it mattered." Samuel felt a warmth spread through him, a quiet satisfaction that came from knowing he had made a difference. For a long moment, they stood in silence. Two men shaped by very different lives, yet connected in ways that words could not fully capture. Samuel's eyes wandered over the fences, the barn, the hills beyond. He realized that his quiet, predictable life had been altered forever. He had learned about vigilance, trust, and courage in a way that no routine could ever teach, and he understood that the lessons from the fugitive would stay with him for the rest of his life. Finally, the fugitive began to move toward the distant hills. Samuel watched him carefully, noting the measured pace, the careful scanning of the horizon, and the quiet strength in every step. It was a reminder of how fragile and yet resilient life could be, of the balance between danger and survival, and of the courage required to keep moving forward even when the world seemed against you. As the man disappeared into the desert, Samuel returned to the ranch house. He walked slowly, reflecting on the past days, replaying every moment of tension, every lesson, every shared glance and quiet conversation. He realized that the experience had changed him in ways he had not anticipated. He was more alert, more aware, and more prepared to face challenges he had never considered. But beyond that, he had learned something about humanity, about trust, kindness, and the bonds they can form in even the most unlikely circumstances. Throughout the following days, Samuel maintained his routine, but everything felt different. The quiet of the ranch, once a comfort, now carried a reminder of vigilance. The distant sounds of the desert rustling animals, shifting wind, the call of a coyote, were no longer just background noise. They were signals, clues, opportunities to observe and act. Samuel had become a student of the land, a protector of his space, and a witness to the lessons imparted by a man who had survived against incredible odds. Samuel also began to notice small changes in himself, beyond skill and awareness. He approached his work with more patience and care, understanding that even small details could have significance. He spoke to his neighbors differently, listening more carefully, observing the way people moved and spoke. The world, he realized, was filled with subtle signs, lessons waiting to be noticed, and dangers waiting to be avoided. The fugitive's teachings extended far beyond survival. They were about perception, understanding, and the quiet strength that comes from paying attention. Months passed, yet the memory of the fugitive remained vivid. Samuel often found himself thinking about the man in the quiet moments, sitting by the fire, walking among the cattle, or watching the sun dip behind the hills. He wondered where the fugitive had gone, what challenges he faced, and how he had survived after leaving the ranch. Samuel felt a mix of hope and worry, knowing that the desert was a harsh and unpredictable place, and that life on the run could be relentless. Yet Samuel also felt gratitude. The experience had taught him more than he could have learned in a lifetime of routine. He had faced fear, witnessed courage, and participated in a bond forged under extraordinary circumstances, and he had discovered a strength within himself that he had not known existed, a quiet resilience, patience, and courage that would guide him in the years to come. One evening, As Samuel sat on the porch watching the sunset, he noticed a distant figure on the horizon. His heart skipped a beat, but as the figure drew closer, he realized it was a traveler, not the fugitive. Still, the moment reminded him of the lessons he had learned. The importance of vigilance, the awareness of surroundings, and the knowledge that life was unpredictable, filled with challenges that required patience and courage. Samuel smiled softly to himself. The desert was vast and wild, but he had grown to understand it in a way he never had before. He felt connected to the land, to the past, and to the fleeting but powerful bond he had shared with the fugitive. And he knew deep down that the lessons and memories from those days would never leave him. Even as life on the ranch returned to a semblance of routine, Samuel remained alert, aware, and ready. He maintained the fences, checked the animals, and walked the property with the careful attention he had learned from his visitor. The experience had made him more cautious, yes, but also more confident. He understood that preparedness and patience were as important as strength and courage, and that kindness could forge bonds that nothing else could.
Samuel never saw the fugitive again.
But in quiet moments he imagined him moving across the desert, surviving, adapting, and thriving. He imagined the man remembering the ranch, the fire, the shared meals, and the moments of calm and understanding that had occurred there. And Samuel felt a sense of connection that transcended distance and circumstance. A bond formed by trust, courage, and the shared experience of facing danger together. The words the fugitive had spoken on the first night echoed in Samuel's mind even now. Get ready for what comes next. They were not just a warning, not just a promise of danger. They were a lesson, a reminder that life was unpredictable, that courage and vigilance were necessary, and that trust, even if brief, could change everything. Samuel understood now that he had been ready in ways he had never imagined, that he had grown stronger, wiser, and more aware. As the sun dipped below the horizon that evening, Samuel stood at the edge of his property, looking out over the desert. The wind carried the scent of earth, sage, and distant water. The ranch was quiet, safe, and still. Yet Samuel knew that the lessons of the past days were alive within him, shaping him, guiding him, preparing him for whatever might come. And in that quiet moment he felt a profound sense of gratitude and understanding. Life was fragile, unpredictable, and often dangerous, but it was also filled with connection, trust, and moments of courage that could define a person forever. Samuel Carter had learned that firsthand, and as he turned back to the ranch house, to the familiar routines and responsibilities, he carried with him not only the memories of the fugitive, but the lessons, courage, and awareness that would remain with him for the rest of his life. The desert stretched endlessly before him, wild and untamed, yet Samuel felt a quiet confidence. He had faced fear, learned the art of vigilance, and discovered the strength of the human spirit in a bond formed under extraordinary circumstances. And he knew, without doubt, that whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them with patience, courage, and an unshakable sense of trust. Lessons given to him by a man who had been more than a fugitive. He had been a teacher, a companion, and a catalyst for growth. As the stars appeared in the night sky, Samuel sat by the fire, reflecting on the journey he had shared with the fugitive. He realized that life was about more than routine or safety. It was about connection, courage, and the quiet strength that came from knowing when to act, when to wait, and when to trust. And though the fugitive had vanished into the desert, his presence remained, shaping Samuel in ways he could never forget. And so, under the vast expanse of the desert sky, Samuel Carter closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in the cool night air, feeling the lessons, courage, and memories of the past days settle into his heart. The world was unpredictable, yes, but he was ready. Ready for whatever came next, carrying with him the wisdom and trust that had been given, and the knowledge that even in the harshest circumstances, courage, vigilance, and kindness could prevail.